So welcome everybody to our conversation with Bio. Uh, Bio's been gracious enough to come and join us tonight and give us a little talk about his experiences as a F-14 RIO Top Gun instructor and even as a commanding officer of the F-211. He's an author of 3 books, Before Top Gun Days, and F-14 RIO, and I have all of them. They're excellent. I'm working my way through Top Gun Days right now. So this is going to be a pretty informal chit chat. Feel free to ask questions, sir. Ask that if you have anything you want to share with us, just feel free to take, as much time as you want. And we just want to say thank you for agreeing to do this. It's very generous and we appreciate it.
Okay. Well, it's a very nice introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? Again, this voice level is good for just talking right here. Okay.
Absolutely.
One reason I do this is because you guys honor my experience and all the, there's like 4,000 Tomcat pilots and RIOs. And so your attention is, honors our experience and our service and the continued service of the guys that are out there doing this right now. Plus, it is a little bit fun for me to think about those days and talk about it and examine it in some cases. I guess I'll tell you a real quick summary of my career experience, and then I'll make one comment about DCS, flying in the RIO cockpit, and then Palehorse, if you want to. So I'll do those right now. If you want to structure something, like start with a topic or something, you can, or you can just call on somebody to ask the first question and we'll make it free form. And I want to plan to go for about 1 hour tonight. If we fade away before then that's fine. I could talk for 3 or 4 hours, but we'll go for about an hour. And then if you want to do it again in a couple of weeks or next month, we'll try to do it again.
Sweet.
Okay, so my experience was I wanted to be a pilot. My eyesight went bad when I was in college, and so I was distressed because I knew you couldn't be a pilot. And this was in the 1970s. There was no LASIK or PRK, whichever one is the operation you can get now. And then I realized, okay, the F-14 has a back seat. I will set that as my goal. And one thing that I'm always careful to tell people is that being a backseater is almost as challenging or as competitive as being a pilot. I mean, a pilot has the training is longer, requires more, hands and eye-hand coordination and all that. But you still have to compete and meet standards and for being a RIO. And the other thing is that there was a lot of other communities when I was going in 1979, 1980. There were a lot of other communities the Navy could send you to. And so I was very fortunate when I got selected for F-14s. I went to the F-14 RAG at Miramar in 1980, went to my first squadron in 1981. I finished my first squadron tour with more than 1,200 hours. I was the first one of my peers, because we knew each other, to get to 1,000 hours in the F-14. I used to fly a lot. I went to Top Gun in 1984. I was there 2.5 years. I went back to F-14s in VF2 in 1987. Then I spent 6 ugly, dark years on staff jobs. And then I was selected for command of VF-211, which was a big honor. And I joined them in 1996, stayed there till 98. And then I did 1 year as a micro mini boss. So along that way, I got almost 2,500 hours in the F-14. I get about 450 hours in the F-5, and then 100 hours or more in various other airplanes. Okay. So the other thing about, I flew in a local guy's F-14 RIO cockpit using VR goggles. And the one thing that was difficult and kind of embarrassing for me is that I have 0 hours using VR goggles and looking at the control and touching the mouse or whatever. So I was like, first hour student. And so I'm sitting there going, oh man, this is embarrassing. And that's one reason why I just don't fly DCS that much. I've seen pilots, you guys all know CW Lemoyne, right?
Yeah.
You know who he is? Okay, I've seen him fly, and he's got a good setup, whether it's his or his friends. It's a very realistic stick, throttle, and all that. And nobody has that for the Rio, I don't think. And so that's why I kind of avoid the back seat. Another thing was just in that little I spent about 2 hours flying with those guys. There were some things that the DCS is doing, and I'm sitting there going, did they copy the F-14 and make it do that, or did they? So there's some things that the guys were asking me, why does this happen? And I go, well, I'm not sure if DCS or Heat Blur or whoever it is built that in, or if that's really replicating the F-14, because the F-14 had a lot of little, strange behaviors. So anyway, so those are kind of warnings, but overall, I've watched some videos. I've, like I said, I've flown the cockpit. It is amazing. Palehorse, what's up first?
Yeah. So I know everybody's kind of dying to find out, crew coordination and really a lot more about what the Rio does. That's one of the things that, as far as DCS goes, we spend a lot of time trying to, like, our goal is to do it as much as realistically as possible. And so I think maybe we'll call on Saber first to ask the first question. He's probably our most knowledgeable guy on Rio duties. He's really got a lot of, he puts forth a lot of effort to try to learn this stuff. And so I'm sure he wants to pick your brain. So if you're
Saber,
cool with that, we'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Palehorse. You do me too much honor. But yeah, so one of the things that I'm most interested in understanding is sort of your radar workflow, like how you went basically talking through the modes and like the settings that you would use, going from like getting past a bra or a bullseye call from like a Hawkeye to pressing the launch button. Like, what does that look like for you?
In the early days, in the 1980s, there was a lot of weight put on being the Rio who could operate pulse search over land. But it takes a lot of Rio concentration, and it's difficult to, it's very difficult to get good information on multiple groups. And so in the 90s, when I came back, more people were using track wall scan, and track wall scan manual is what I always started with. The bad thing about track wall scan is in the real F-14A, which is what I flew, and I don't know how much the radar has changed in the B, maybe a tiny bit, but in the F-14A, track wall scan would show you false targets also. And but what I would do is, if I was out there doing something right now, you have your all the Rios have to have their assigned scan volumes. Okay, so if you only have 2 jets, then you look at the threat sector and decide what's the altitude scan and whether you can go plus or minus 20 degrees 4 bar or 40 degree 2 bar, right? And so you point at the threat sector, you set your antenna for your scan volume. You guys know how to do all that?
Yes.
Yeah, you got overlap at a certain range and all that. And then I would fly in track wall scan manual. And I'd set my TID at probably 100 miles, but that was based on the training scenarios. One thing that you're very careful about is using a circular scope. So what's the display is still round, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think the displays are exactly the same in the B as in the A.
Okay, well later they got the square, the PTID square one.
Yeah, we
And
don't
so,
have that.
okay, so you wouldn't lose, but if you've you got to be careful that somebody's not on the edge of your scope and sitting there just off the display. So I mean, it's better to go 200 miles, and you'll see them real little. You can't get shit for information, but as soon as you know somebody's there, okay, then you can try 100 miles. Okay, so track wall scan manual. First guy to get the contact starts the fighters moving and comes up with a game plan. And then the RIOs do the meld at the agreed upon range. And do you guys know what meld is? Is that a common term?
It's familiar, but I don't think we have a great understanding of what it actually entails.
Okay. So say let's just make it unusual. Say the guy looking at the low block gets the first contact and he gets it out at 45 miles. And it's only one group right now. The guy who's looking at the high block, he's got to continue to sanitize his block for a little while. Because just because the low guy got the first one doesn't mean that's the only bandits out there, or bogeys or whatever, bogeys and bandits. Mm-hmm. So then there's a predetermined range where the guy in the other block points his radar at the known detected bogeys. And that's meld range, MELD. I don't know all the rules of thumb for that, but and I don't remember them, but that's something you want to do. And then we also, I think, there's you got to decide when you're going to switch the lead. The flight lead is the guy who's flies you out to station and runs the mission, while you're on station. But if the wingman RIO gets the first contact, his plane should become the tactical lead. And that's the way we operated it, in my experience. And the other thing is, after a very quick initial call, either bullseye or bra, the very next, to make sure everybody's got that much SA, the next thing he's got to do is game plan. Come to 305 for offset, or put them on the nose, or whatever your game plan is. Or stay on this heading. Let's just watch them, because they're not a threat to our strike group that we're protecting, or something like that. Okay, does that help you a little bit?
Yeah, and then just sort of one quick follow on. When you guys if you were theoretically going to try to take a shot, were you guys exclusively trying to take shots in track wall scan, or in single target track, or a combination of both, depending on the situation?
I think most of the Phoenix shots would have been out of track wall scan, because you continue in normal everyday operation. Clearly, we all knew that STT was an option, but that just is, the system's designed to shoot Phoenix in track wall scan. And even if you only have one Phoenix, which is what we usually carried, because even two Phoenix is a heavy load. Yeah, even if you only have one Phoenix, there's a lot of benefits to shooting in track wall scan. There's some drawbacks, but there's a lot of benefits to it. So I'd shoot in track wall scan. And in fact, I think I used to go to track wall scan auto, because I wanted to do as much before the computer. I didn't want to rely on that computer to do that stuff.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Warhawk, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So my question is going to revolve around the programming for your dispensing chaff and flares. So at DCS, we've got that option where we can set up a pre-program, set it up so it'll drop, say, 2 chaff, wait a second, drop 2 more, wait a second, and so on. Is that something that you ever used, or is that something you guys found beneficial? Or
yep.
And how did you all kind of set that program up? What was kind of your standard SOP on that?
You know, luckily I don't remember the details because I think the details would be classified. But I would say that you would have a short program, like 4 bursts of chaff or something like that. When I was a new guy, and this is a story. I mean, every once in a while I'll give a speech to a group of people or something. And when I was a junior officer in my first squadron, the pilot that I was flying with, he and I wanted to use every system. And we found that really nobody else in our squadron had a good understanding of the ALE-39, the old chaff and flare dispenser that we used to use. And so he and I used to use it on every flight. We would check it, it's back in the jet on the bottom. We'd check it before we went. I religiously set up the program. We'd use it. We'd come back and we'd look at it, to see what happened. And so I became a SME on the chaff and flare dispenser. And one thing that we talked about was if you didn't know what kind of missiles you were facing, we would have our ordies, and this was all constructive, but we worked with the ordies anyway. We'd have the ordies load 1 chaff and 1 flare and alternate. And then I would just have to know that, and I would program my dispenser realizing, I would have to pay attention to where it was loaded. So you really had to outsmart the controls. But just the fact that you're thinking of using burst of chaff is good. It's a good start. But if you're going against IR missiles, not going to help you any, of course,
Right.
as you know. Yeah. So does DCS respond realistically to countermeasures? Does it say that it does? I mean, can you decoy a missile with countermeasures?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You can,
Shoot,
but
I
it
would.
is,
Yeah.
it is like the least in-depth portion of DCS simulation for the most part. There's a lot of confusion as to exactly how it works, and especially electronic countermeasures aren't well modeled at all.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of confusion on how exactly that works in real life because it's almost exclusively classified.
Yeah, and I won't talk about that at all. But I was the SME on electronic countermeasures too, and that was complicated.
Some math there.
Yeah, but also concepts of frequency and amplitude and whatever. I'm not gonna say anymore. Yeah, thanks. You trying to get me in trouble, Data?
Just a little bit.
So,
Sir, and
so
if we do have
Warhawk,
any questions that you don't want to answer, just feel free to just say, I don't want to get into that,
well, sometimes, I mean, so I already said the classification thing. And that's really true. I mean, we shouldn't talk about electronic countermeasures, but there's other things that I'll admit that I just, I finished flying in 1998. A lot was changing around that time. And I am not up to date on the latest forward quarter tactics,
Right.
which is good, which is fine with me because they should be highly classified, I think. So Warhawk, did I answer your question about countermeasures, or did you have?
Yeah, you did. And, I just kind of off the subject of being in the RIO seat, I was just kind of curious because I was doing, I'd done a little reading, a little research, in preparation for tonight. And would you care to talk about the time that you saw a mysterious black plane in a hangar?
What, down in Key West?
Yeah, the one down in Key West.
Okay, has anybody on this seen an SR-71 in real life?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, you've seen them at museums probably,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
never an active one.
Okay, that's good enough though.
Yeah.
When Top Gun went down to Key West, it was in I think that was my 1986, the second time I went down there with Top Gun. We landed. The maintenance officer who was there setting everything up, he met us all at the plane with a beer, which was, we didn't do that at Miramar. And then he goes, go over and look in the hangar. So I remember walking over there, and the cool thing was it was kind of like out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you ever saw that. The hangar's old, and it's all dusty, and there's light filtering in through holes and stuff. And there's this SR-71 parked there. And it was just so cool looking. So we walked around. There were Air Force sentries with M16s, and they were, you know, keeping people a certain distance away. But we were walking around looking at it, and you could see holes in the engine skin where pieces of the engine had come through, which is what caused the thing to divert to Key West. So just like 30 seconds after I walked in, this sentry comes up to me and goes, "Sir, I need to see your ID, sir." I go, "Why?" He goes, "Sir, you're the only one in here who's got a camera, sir." I go, he goes, "No photos are allowed. You know, if I see it," and he wrote down all my stuff. He goes, "If I see any pictures from this hangar, we're going to come look at you." I said, "Okay, I'm fine. I'm not taking any pictures." And then what happened was it took him a few days to get the thing fixed. And so by then everybody in Key West knew about it. And so the day before they took off, they let groups of school kids come out on a school bus and look at it. And they had a public viewing. They dragged it out of the hangar, which was very cool by the Air Force, I thought. So the next day it took off, and it looks pretty cool. You know, if you've never seen one fly, it looks pretty cool. But it took off, it just climbed to about 1,200 feet, and then it turned, and we could see it fly off in the distance. It came around, and what it was doing was it was flying around the island at low altitude, flying over downtown. Then it came by, did a climb, and flew away. And we're all sitting there going like, that climb was okay. I mean, it's a cool looking airplane, but you know, whatever. Well, within a half hour, it was back on the runway because they had a problem with the other engine, and that was where their maintenance crew was. And they go, "We're going back to Key West." So the finish of the story was we talked to the pilot and the RSO in the club that night, the officers club, and a bunch of Top Gun instructors. We go, "Well, that climb out wasn't that good." And so I had to leave a couple of days later, but the guys that stayed there and saw it take off again, they said the second climb out was a lot better. So, and no, they did not tell us how fast they flew. They would not tell us that. Yes.
Data, you have any questions?
I got one that's not so technical.
That's fine.
How in the real world do RIOs and pilots hook up? Because in our world, there's a lot of flirting and really crazy things going on. It's gonna be fair. It's not very becoming of a lot of adult men on how we get our RIOs and pilots hooked up in this world.
Don't give away my secrets, Data.
You guys hear my phone? Wait a minute. Let me hit you on mute for a second.
He's got a secret mission.
Yeah.
Wow, a complimentary free vacation. No, thank you. Okay. In a squadron, the crews are selected by the CO. It's that simple.
Just assigned.
They are assigned.
And you always fly with the same guy.
No, you fly with the same guy. And this is something you guys may want to consider. We flew with the same guy about 80% of the time. I mean, I could look in my logbook and see because I got my logbook that red book right there on the shelf.
Nice.
It's 3 logbooks stuck together. But we flew with the same guy about 80% of the time. And I thought that was the best of both worlds because it allowed the pilot in Rio to develop, you know, good crew coordination, become more effective, but also it was good for standardization. If you're flying with another guy and he does something wrong or he does something better, you can take it back to your guy, you know. But during my career, in my first squadron, the CO picked me to fly with him. And I wasn't happy about that because I was a Lieutenant JG. I wanted to fly with a lieutenant, and go out and fool around and stuff. But it turned out that the CO was a good guy, and also that, that led to our ejection, and that was a big story too. So
yeah.
Then in my VF2 squadron, where I was a lieutenant commander, I was flying with a pilot that I really liked flying with, and he was a great pilot. And we were on deployment, and good chat comments. Sorry, I know I should just not break character, but
No, Warhawk, you can't tell on me.
we were on deployment, and the skipper said, okay, let's have a all aircrew meeting, or no, a department head meeting, and let's talk about new aircrew assignments. And so we spent about an hour and a half matching up the names and stuff, because we had like 15 pilots and RIOs, and we had to make sure, okay, but so we spent like an hour and a half talking about this. And then at the end of the meeting, the skipper goes, okay, good inputs. I'll take this into consideration. And then he went and did what he wanted to do anyway. And I was going like, oh man, he put me with a guy that I didn't really want to fly with. So good question. Assigned by the CEO. Yes.
So the way that we usually do it is we'll let the RIOs pick who they want their primary pilot to be. And then if that pilot's not available, we'll try and have them, squeeze into the back seat with whoever is available. So that way we can kind of get that worked out that way.
Yeah. How often do you guys fly?
Tuesdays and Thursdays, definitively, those are our training nights. And then we'll try to work in maybe like a Saturday here or there, or, a Friday night.
That's good. Well,
I'll fly as often as I can find a pilot to sit in the front seat.
That's a good attitude. I mean, that's the way I was when I was a junior officer. Okay.
Hey, I have a question from Piddles. He's the guy in the tractor over there. So his service is a little bit messed up. So I'm going to read it off for him.
Piddles, are you working? Or just drive? Oh, wait. Oh, you're driving
I'm actually driving home right now. We just got rained out, but my service is sketchy. So.
Okay. Cool.
He was in a tractor earlier. He's a farmer up in South Dakota, if I'm not mistaken.
North Dakota.
North Dakota. One of the Dakotas.
Yes. North Dakota. There is a difference.
Sorry. Okay. He wanted to know what it's like trying to read the displays in some of the jets that were 20 or more years old and the screens were burned in. He heard that was a problem, and he's curious how they overcame it.
It is a little bit of a problem. And the way you overcome it is by doing whatever it takes to read that screen. So if it's a sunny day and the sun's right over your head and the screen is burned in there, you'll be down there like this. I don't care if you're going, 800 knots or pulling 6.5 Gs. You will do what it takes to read that screen. Yeah, and it was a problem sometimes, especially on the old first generation F-14 A's. I guess that was a CRT, and some of them, you just couldn't adjust them enough.
Parts just not available anymore? Because I'm an avionics technician now for F-15s, and I'm just curious what if we see a burned-in CRT, it's a criteria that warrants removal and replacement. So I'm just wondering what was driving that. Do you remember?
Well, I would have to say that part of it could have been I guess just poor supply chain, or not ordering enough, or not realizing it was going to be a problem, doing the best they can until they could replace it.
Yeah. And end of life too, things just get a little less love. That's just kind of how it is too. But
well, the F-14 went through, in my experience, it went through cycles. And I keep meaning to do research on this. Dave Brown's book, Tomcat Alley that has all the bureau numbers. It has the years that they were manufactured and assigned. And my recollection is that my first squadron, VF-24, our jets, we had some radar problems. We didn't even have TCS. And it could have been, and this was in 1981 to 84, it could have been that those planes had not yet been through rework, or some of them hadn't. And I think that I remember the squadron talking about us, we had the high time F-14. I mean, at the time, I didn't care about that stuff. And then when I came back and I was in VF2, man, we had great radars. And there's just so many factors, the fighter wing assigns where the airplanes go, and just so many factors. But I was thinking that maybe the planes in VF2 had either been through rework, or maybe some of them were even brand new, which was nice. And then in VF211, we had our planes were pretty good. And I mentioned this a little bit in the book Tomcat RIO, but something I'll tell you guys is that our when I was the XO, before I became the CO, we just pushed the squadron too hard. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. And then also some of our senior maintenance chiefs, a lot of them did not have F-14 experience. So they had been, with P3s or something else, and they needed to go on sea duty or whatever, and they were assigned to a F-14A squadron. So the Navy manpower system, it had its problems, and fleet squadrons paid the price.
I think that's
Okay.
one of the best things about DCS is we have near perfect maintenance, an unlimited fuel budget, and as much ammunition as we want to shoot, which is just like, I was just reading the book and I'm like, having to not have gas when you wanted it, and I was just like, that's the best thing about DCS. We get to burn 20,000 pounds every flight and not worry about it.
That
until deployment starts.
Until what?
Until deployment starts.
Oh.
Then we're going to be tracking all of that.
Well, that'll be interesting. That would definitely add an interesting aspect to it. And that's kind of one of the recurring themes of this book is my occasional fuel problems, low fuel and stuff like that. And it is a terrible feeling to be flying in an F-14 and get low on gas. And the reason is that, especially back then, a couple of times a year, somebody would run out of fuel. Maybe not an F-14, but some jet, they would eject and the jet would crash. And so it actually happened. And you're sitting there and you're not going, oh, this will never happen, or this is too big. No, you're sitting there going, I don't want to be the next dumb ass that runs out of gas,
Bad fumes in here.
Fumes?
Yeah. It's happened maybe, I don't know, 6
Yeah.
or 7 times.
He got his call sign because he ran out of gas quite a few times on formation training flights.
Well, there was an F-8 pilot who got his call sign fumes because he ran out of gas. And he's a very good stick, and he came to F-14s and was a very good stick. And guys, it's amazing how fast you can go through the fuel. Okay, questions?
Hey, Cosmic, do you have a question?
So what do you think, beside your eyesight, what was the hardest part about going from ROTC in college to saying I am and going to be an aviator of some kind? What was the biggest challenges?
I'm going to be, I don't really think of myself as a cocky bastard, and my wife makes sure that I stay modest and stuff like that. But I showed up at Pensacola thinking I'm going to be a Tomcat RIO. And that was how I envisioned myself. And I knew I had a lot of work. I had to earn it, but I didn't have a plan be. But on the other hand, so I'll tell you right now, what's the biggest challenge? And this made me more humble. Getting airsick on my first 2 flights. That'll slow you down a little bit.
Yeah.
So in terms of being, I thought the Navy did a good job of building you into the person they wanted you to be and preparing you for what's going to happen the next day or whatever. And they would tell us, and I realize this looking back, they prepared you for what's going to happen the next year, but I wasn't able to process that. So I was ready to what's going to happen the next day and the next week. Is that what you're thinking of, or are you in ROTC by any chance?
I am currently just a high schooler, but I have plans to join the Naval ROTC program, and then hopefully I will be a naval aviator by the time it's all said and done. My
advice to you is to remember all those guys that are flying those fighter jets right now. They were dorks in high school at some time. I'm not saying you're a dork, but
no, you can't. It's okay.
He's a dork.
But the other thing is they were normal people, and some of them were athletes. I was not an athlete. I swam a little in high school. I was in decent shape, but I wasn't an athlete. One guy in Pensacola who became a RIO, he got his master's degree at MIT before going to flight training. So that would qualify as a brain. And he did one of the stupidest mistakes on his final flight and almost got kicked out, but he didn't. And so it's everybody in between. And those are RIOs. Pilots are the same thing. Some guys were guys that, like me, dreamed of being there for me, it came when I was around 10 years old. And other guys, I remember, you ask people, what are you doing here? Some guys joined the Navy because they were tired of their regular job. They go, I'll just go join the Navy. I think I can be an officer. And they ended up flying F-14s. So it's just an interesting mix of people. I'm sure you can handle it.
Babalu, do you have a question?
Yes. Thanks for being here, Bio. Really appreciate it. The reason I got into this is because of Topgun, so you're partly to blame for that. When you became a seasoned RIO and they would stick you with junior pilots, what were some of the characteristics you wanted to see in them or try to instill in them to make them better pilots and crew members?
That is a very good question, because there's a guy who I flew with, and I speak well of him in here. His name was Pager. And when I say in here, I'm talking about the new book. I get it. He was a good stick, but he was also always willing to learn. And to me, that doesn't take humility, that takes confidence to be willing to learn. I mean, first, you got to have some ability. You got to bring ability. You can't just walk in like an empty vessel and say, okay, teach me everything. No, he brought to the game, but he had a good attitude, because every flight you're learning stuff. So in a new pilot, that's what I wanted to see, just the, willingness to learn, I guess. Now I'm thinking back about another guy who I didn't like flying with so much, who I will not name. And he wasn't that good of a pilot. And so I'm going, I don't know how he got out of the RAG, but I wish he would have gotten some more practice on the basics or something. So, I guess that's even more fundamental than willingness to learn. Pager also, though, he liked studying the fighter business. He liked talking about it, dissecting it, and that's what you got to do. And in fact, I learned that from doing. I wrote an article about Randy Cunningham. Does everybody know who Randy Cunningham was? The MiG killer ace in Vietnam? Okay. Cunningham just ate, slept, and breathed fighters. And it wasn't just, F-4 Phantoms and MiGs. It was everything from the dawn of fighter aviation. But he also loved his Phantom, and he studied MiGs and everything. And so being immersed in it like that, there's a lot to be said for that. On the other hand, some guys in one of my squadron, they really were lackadaisical, and it was obvious that it was a mistake for them. And they got out of the Navy as soon as they could. I mean, here's guys, the Navy has put them through pilot training, made them F-14 pilots, and they just didn't like it, And so, oh, well, I know. I'm going like, man.
And it's hard to imagine.
But now being in a squadron on a deployment, it's challenging. They ask a lot. You have to leave your house, your wife, if you have kids, your car, everything. For me, the first deployment I went on, I was a single guy, totally single. And so I just thought it was cool. But then I met the girl who became my wife. And by the second one, I go, this isn't as much fun this time.
Wiley, do you have a question?
Yeah, so my question, it's not DCS specific. It's more just kind of want to get the info. Obviously, as an NFO, you became the CEO of the Checkmates, and you alluded to being the micro or the mini boss afterwards. Is there, as an NFO, or did you have the opportunity to become like a DCAG or a CAG on your way to getting command of like a carrier if you decided to take that path?
Yes, I know several F-14 RIOs and other community NFOs that have become CAGs. And the way the Navy has done it now is you either go to Air Wing Command or Carrier Command. It used to be the CAG was a commander, a senior commander, and that was on the way to being a Carrier Command. But now it's either one. But yeah, the Navy takes great care of NFOs. But for me, I think, and I'll just be candid, I don't know exactly where I fell off. I've got some analysis, but I got the idea that I was not going to be a CAG or a carrier skipper. But that was fine with me. I decided to get out at 20. I got selected to be an 06, and I go, nah, I decided to get out. I'm going to get out. One of my problems was when, in order to advance to squadron command, you have to do something that's called a department head tour. And I did my department head tour. I was the operations officer of VF2, and I was the most junior lieutenant commander in the squadron. So I did my department head tour very early in my career. And if I had not done that, then the detailers would have put me on shore duty for a couple of years and then put me back to a squadron as soon as possible. So I could check that block, but I already checked the block. So that was it. They could keep me out. It was fine. I got to command a squadron, and that was something I didn't even think about for a long time. So
Awesome. Hey,
yep, sure. Wolfpack, I thought you were, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. Thank you again for coming and joining us and giving us this insightful information. My first question would be two parts. As far as when you were getting ready for deployment, can you go over briefly how your squadron would go through its workups? And the second part is, can you describe one of the scariest feelings? I know one of mine is case-3ing at night. I hate it with a passion, but it's something that it's a skill that you have to continuously do to get better at. And can you describe one of those cases when you came in for a case-3, any case-3 that you may have done in your career?
So you're talking case-3 at night in DCS, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so first let's talk about workups, and then I'll come back to the night approach. The quick story on workups is you get back from a deployment, and then you have your turnaround length identified. It's called turnaround, or at least, you know, it was. And so the squadron gets back from deployment, and they usually get about 2 weeks of mostly time off. And when I was a junior officer in the 80s, it seemed like we could get 3 or 4 weeks, and it was really pretty good time off. And then when I was a squadron skipper in 1997, 98 at the end of deployment, it seemed like you get back, you get a couple of days, and then in the wing, and everybody's going, "Oh, you guys starting up again?" Blah, blah, blah. It's like, come on, man, give us some time off. Okay, so as soon as that ends, you start with basic building block training, and you do like an air-to-air gunnery detachment or air-to-air tactics, or you do one mission at a time, and you'll do that for like 2 weeks. And there's several missions, you know, like air to ground, pure air to air guns, and things like that. But you'll just work on those building blocks for a few weeks. And sometimes you'll do that from your home base. Other times you'll go on a detachment to Key West, El Centro, something like that. And then in between those detachments, the squadron's always flying, and it's always flying training syllabus sorties, but it's a general type of training. So then you do, usually it's 3 deployments on the carrier of 1 month each. And that's way different than what we used to do back in the old days. Back in the old days, I'm going to share my screen with you. Let's see. VF-24 workups. Oh man. Oh well. Back in the old days, they would put you out on the carrier for a week, bring you home for a week, put you out on the carrier for 2 weeks, bring you home for a week, and they were just run the squadron to death going back and forth. Now it's 3 1-month trips to the carrier, and each one gets a little bit more complex. And then the final workup event is either air wing Fallon training, which is excellent training now. I can't remember if that comes, I think that comes just before the final carrier detachment. But both of those are very good training, and they are aimed directly at whatever the world situation is. So in 1997, when VF-211 was training for deployment, we were training to an Iraq style threat and Iraq style scenarios. And Fallon is excellent training. And so that's what a workup cycle is. It builds in complexity, and you go from, you know, air crew events to squadron events to air wing events. Underlying all that nowadays is Strike Fighter Weapons and Tactics, SFWT program. That's also excellent training, aircrew training within the squadron. So naval aviation training is much better than it was back in 1981. Okay, let's talk about case 3 approaches. You may not believe this, and maybe I was naive or dumb or whatever, but as a RIO, I liked case 3 approaches because I felt I could watch the numbers. But there was a bad one. I'll tell you a bad one. But I felt I could watch the numbers, and as long as you're watching the numbers, I mean, you really got to pay attention, but you're watching airspeed, altitude, and distance. And you know, that's what it is. In the daytime, there's a lot more judgment, and it's called breaking the deck. You're sitting there in low holding, you're hawking the deck. You may have 2 or 4 jets here, the carrier's down below you, and there's 2 or 4 jets over here. And you're watching each other, watching the deck. And when the time is right, you descend, you fly, you go over the carrier. Well, if you're too early, then you got to spin it at low altitude, and everybody goes, "Oh, this guy's screwed up." And if you're too late, the boss is going, "Well, hey, what are you guys waiting for?" So it really takes a lot of judgment in the daytime. At night, radar control, numbers, got it. However, I'm a backseater, you know. The pilot is up there with very few visual cues, working his butt off, to fly into the flight deck, into the wires. And I really wish I had a 100% crystal clear memory of this. But when I was a junior officer, I remember coming in and we got so low that I remember the ball was flashing. The red ball was flashing. Pilot popped. I don't know why they didn't wave us off, but we popped up and landed, and it was a rough landing and everything. And I remember, but we landed, caught a wire, got out of the plane. And I remember walking through the ship a few minutes later and hearing guys in workshops and spaces going, "Did you see that F-14? God, what was that?" And I was sitting there thinking, I was in that airplane, That's my pilot. So I have had bad case 3 approaches. Every RIO here likes case 3 better than case 1.
All right, real quick, Tiger, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I want to say again, Bio, thanks for being with us. It's really cool that you're here. My question would be, in the CAG, in our group, we have a sometimes friendly, sometimes not so friendly rivalry with our F-18 compatriots. We rib each other to death. I'm a Navy vet. I know how it is in the real Navy as well. But from your perspective, was there that rivalry between the 14 crews and the 18 crews?
What community were you? What'd you
I
do?
was a Fleet Marine Force corpsman.
Everybody liked you, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Man, I'm sure you saw some stuff. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So hats off to you. That's amazing. FMF corpsman. Okay. So in my last air wing, well, here's one thing that was interesting. I've made 5 deployments. My first 4 deployments were before we didn't have Hornets in the air wing. So my first 2 deployments, we had 2 F-14 squadrons, A-7 squadrons, and A-6 squadrons. It was great. The A-7s, they liked to fly, they liked to play, and they knew they weren't Tomcats, and we didn't feel threatened by them. But a light-loaded A-7 with auto maneuvering flaps was a fair opponent to an F-14 that was fully loaded. I mean, he's not going to beat you, but he's a good opponent for on deployment. Then my next air wing, we just had 2 F-14 squadrons and 2 A-6 squadrons. And so that was interesting too. Just the F-14 squadrons were always butting heads. My last air wing, we had 3 F-18C squadrons and 1 F-14 squadron. And I got to tell you, most of the trash talk and everything, thinking back on it, was kind of light. There is rivalry, there is trash talk and stuff like that. But we did Operation Southern Watch during the deployment. So we did not get shot at, but it was a real world mission supporting, we were on the front page of newspapers and stuff like that sometimes. And so there just wasn't a lot of bandwidth for BS. We all had jobs to do. When we did strike planning, we all worked together. I got to tell you, the F-18 guys, I mean, they didn't apologize to anybody. You don't want strike fighter pilots who feel bad, but I think they acknowledged that the Lantern pod was better than their IR targeting pod, because we had this spanking new Lantern pod, and we had our big 9-inch TID display, and so we had the best target acquisition video of anybody. And plus, we had a RIO to do the job. Here's a Hornet pilot trying to fly formation, navigate, locate the target on his little pod and his little display, doing the best he can. And they, they did fine, obviously, but we felt like we had better target acquisition. On the other hand, when we did some ACM training, I just felt like the Tomcats were always carrying tanks, Phoenix rails, And the Hornets, it was just always a tough fight when we were dogfighting against them. That's a good airplane, you know? And so flying an F-14A loaded down, it was tough fighting against a Hornet. I think almost every other F-14 guy thinks, almost every other F-14 guy thinks the Tomcat was better than I do, because I guess it was the pilots I flew with or something. Although I do remember back in 1988 when we were fighting F-16Ns, we were doing great. I mean, I was flying with Lumpy and we were staying engaged with F-16s and they were not shooting us. So the Tomcat had configuration challenges and stuff like that. So did I answer your question about air wing? If guys are getting ugly, then clearly, you can't let it bother you, because like, whatever, dude, what are we in third grade? You're trying to, and our air wing wasn't like that. None of my air wings were. Okay. So who said watch Fighter Fling 2004 video? Warhawk. Why'd you say that?
In that video, sorry, I had to get control of my mouse. In that video, the Tomcat, some of the guys that put that video together poked a little bit of good-natured humor, fun at the 18 pilots that were coming on board. It was the final tour video of Fighter Fling. Well,
I should probably go watch that one then. Because I've seen a lot of Fighter Fling videos, but there's this is an eternal discussion.
Well, I think, for me, I know that, my time in the Navy when we were on board ship, when we were underway and out doing something, all of the stupid, in-house fighting, between engineering and deck department, that all went out the door because we had a ship to sail.
Yeah.
And we got into port, went out and had a few beers. That's when we tended to kind of rattle each other.
Yep. And with air crews, it's probably just about the same. Hey, Palehorse, let's take one more question.
Okay. Stick, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Oh man, I get to be the guy to finish this off. Oh my goodness. I feel like Ricky Bobby. Okay. Bio, thank you so much for doing this. Before I get to my question, I just wanted to point out something back from way in the beginning of this when these guys, when you asked how many RIOs we had in our squadron, I can't believe not a single person said we always have room for one more in case you need if you want to put the VR headset back on there.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
But the question would be referring to communication between the pilot and the RIO, especially when talking about BFM/ACM maneuvers. I tend to scream like a cheerleader, and I'm curious of how was it professionally? So, what were you feeding to your pilot, and what were you hoping to get back from him?
Oh, that's good. I would say the most fundamental communication is in a multi-bandit environment, multi-bogey, multi-bandit, who's got who, and I'm not sure how well this works in DCS. In the F-14, it was great. My pilot's chasing a guy, I can look up, I can see where his head is looking, and I can look at who he's watching, and he'd say, take the guy on the left. I go, I got him. And then I'd be watching. I go, I lost him. Oh, there he is again, blah, blah, blah. So you make sure that somebody's got visual on all, or a tally on all the threats. Then the next thing is, and I wrote about this in one of the books in Top Gun days, is I was flying with a pilot who told me he just wanted airspeed. But that was just a focused situation. We were in a 1v1 environment. He was trying to work on his airspeed control. So that's all he wanted me to say. Then when we got through that phase, I got back to my normal, and I don't think I said too much if it didn't need to be said. So I don't think I was a cheerleader. But I mean, we're in an airplane. You're in DCS. You should have some fun, a little more, at least a little more fun.
Yeah.
So
Get that saber, you got to keep looking at my head.
100%, man. I got you.
Absolutely. I'm going to hold you to it.
So the other thing is, a good, candid, open debrief is worth, is very valuable. And you guys ought to establish that policy, I think. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You may already have it. But this pilot who asked me for the airspeed, we had an agreement. We said, look, no personal defensiveness when we're debriefing our flight. If I say something to you, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to tell you something that I think will make us do better. So, that's as a RIO, if we were in a low threat environment, I found myself spending more time working safety of flight, airspeed management, of course, navigation, debriefing notes, things like that. If we're in a big multi-bogey high threat environment, I'm going to be heads out looking behind me, and still you've got safety of flight issues, fuel management, navigation, altitude, but not so much. I flew with one pilot who is a very good pilot. And one time we were slow and nose high, and I said, get the nose down. And at the end of the engagement, he goes, don't ever tell me how to fly the jet. I go like, okay, whatever. Fine. On the other hand, he never told me what radar mode to select, and I remember seeing that on on somebody's DCS video that I watched last year or whatever. A pilot is saying, why don't you use this? And I'm sitting there going like, oh man, I'd say, why don't you go, blah, blah, whatever. Okay. Palehorse,
Yes,
like I
sir.
said, I could go for another hour, but I'm going to let us all have our lives back. You guys talk about it, think about it. If you want to do this again in a month, maybe, I'm game. So.
Well, we'd be glad to have you back. One final question, sir. Your books, can you tell us where we could find them if anybody doesn't have them already?
Oh yeah, the easiest thing to do is to go onto Amazon.com and order them. That's the easiest thing to do.
Right.
That's simple.
Well, Bio, thank you so much on behalf of the
Thanks for your
entire
time,
group.
I was going to ask you, are you getting Audible narration you wrote 3 books, correct? I think Top Gun Days has Audible on it.
The first 2 are audiobooks, and the third one is going to be, but it's just been delayed by COVID, the whole publishing industry. Yeah, but it's going to be audio also.
All right.
Yep. Okay, I'm not just saying this because you guys outnumber me, but you guys really gave a good accounting of yourself tonight. You asked good questions, and so it's a pleasure talking to you. Data, I thought, were you going to say something?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, Palehorse, so I'll let you close out or whatever, but this was good. This is fun. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a good night and enjoy that rocket launch.
Okay, and I've got one more request. If any of you guys have read my new book, Tomcat RIO, will you take a minute and go onto Amazon and leave a review? There aren't that many reviews. So, okay, thanks. Yeah, there's a rocket launch scheduled right around midnight.
And we're off to case 3 practice.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for your time, Bio.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, see ya.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
My
That
pleasure.
was awesome.